Okay, good stuff. Well, let's begin. And first of all, I'd like to say again, welcome to everyone to this exciting virtual event, creating an authentic EVP using storytelling and gamification, which is going to be, some really great insight we're going to share today. And I'm so happy to see so many HR, talent acquisition, and in-house recruitment leaders able to join us. Just to kick off, this is my first ever virtual event. It's actually my first ever public speaking slot. So if I do make any faux pas or bloopers, I do apologise in advance. And also before I begin, I'd just like to extend a thanks to the guys at In-House Recruitment Network for putting this great event together, to my team as well for all the fantastic work they put in, and to our two fantastic invited speakers, Paula and Marcus. I'm sure will blow you away as the session goes on. So let's get cracking. A little hello. So who am I, first of all? It's a good question. My name's William Geldart. I'm the brand lead and marketing manager at BPS. As you might guess in the title, I've got a special passion for all things EVP, all things employer brand as well, and also a passion for looking into the future, which has never been so pertinent, I guess, as perhaps it is now in the environment we're currently in. A quick bit about BPS, and Tasha covered it very well, actually. We are a global recruitment partner. At our heart, we're problem solvers, though. We work with HR leaders and talent professionals like yourselves to help you hone in on the particular challenges that may be hindering your ability to attract, recruit, and retain the right people, as Natasha says. Now, typically we do that through a process we call BPS Labs, which is where we invite people like yourselves and your board teams, exec teams, to collaborative workshops to really focus on that particular issue you may have or set of issues and deliver some real outcomes. And as Natasha also pointed out, if you want to find out more, please feel free to come to our stand. We'd love to speak to you, myself or my colleagues Simon and Leanne. Anyway, shameless plug over. Let's move on to a bit more in terms of setting the scene for this event. Okie doke. So yeah, this segment I've been titled kind of the state of employer brand today and tomorrow. And what I'd like to do in this opening bit is tell a story, because the nature of this event, much like the world, has changed a lot since it was initially conceptualized. So we started thinking about this probably in earnest the start of this year. And obviously, as I said, a lot has changed since then. And we knew that there were challenges that already existed around employer brand and EVP, and we knew through our own work through labs and through our own research and conversation day to day that there are a lot of businesses out there who struggle to align on this North Star, if you like, of employer value proposition and employer brand. So that was already the environment pre-COVID, and perhaps, as I'll display to you, it's only become accelerated and will be accelerated post-COVID as well. There will be a different type of set of challenges as well, which I'll come on to as well, in terms of not just attraction, but also retention, which will be key. And we also know all of this because HR leaders and TA professionals told us this back in January when we did an initial round of research on the subject. And we'll be going to visit that shortly. And we'll also be looking at another set, a tale of two data sets in terms of the research we've done more recently in May around COVID-19 and the future of HR and what you told us about EVP and employer brand. And from there, I'm going to have two great speakers who are going to expand upon some of the theories I'm going to present today and some of the how-to, because that was something, again, that you guys have come forward with. Thank you very much for that ahead of this event. A lot of questions around, well, where do we start? How do we develop this thing called an EVP? How do we measure it? And we'll also be touching upon that as well, and looking a bit more into the future with Marcus, which will be really exciting. So there's three kind of key points, I guess, to kick off with that we'll explore. We already knew that EVP and employer brand was a hot topic, a challenge before COVID-19 kind of struck. Retention is going to be ever more key, if not more important, in terms of the shorter term, keeping hold of those key employees of yours. And the third point that I'm going to be running through is really that piece around how do you start to create and articulate this EVP. Right, so data and trends. Should load in a second. In terms of data and trends and the before, and there's kind of the state of employer EVP and employer brand. Well, it was a bit like Brexit. When we came down to it in January, there was a lot of people split down the middle in terms of their responses, and I'll show you what I mean. First off, that piece around, have you got an articulated EVP? Yes, 56%, no, unsure, well, 44%. And have you reflected on or updated your EVP in the last 2 years? It was even more Brexit, it was 51-49. And I'll come on to a quick poll for you guys in a second as well. But also the other bit that was really interesting was how many employees within your organization could accurately describe your EVP. And only 16% reckoned 3/4 or more of their workforce could. 55% thought less than 50% of their workforce could. So there's a disconnect there, and it's a bit worrying. And as I said, in January already, these were kind of the results being borne out. But let's do a little snap poll. Let's make this a bit more interactive, a bit more fun, and ask you guys as well in terms of the questions. I think Natasha showed it earlier, and I think we can get it up, is yes, have you got, thank you, have you got an articulated EVP, and have you reflected on or updated that in the last 2 years? We'll just give a little bit of time for you guys to answer that.
I'll let you know when it starts or stops any poll sort of results coming through, and then I'll be able to share it with you, Will.
Fantastic. I hope it bears out what we already know. Actually, no, I'm not sure I do hope that. I'd love to spin on it.
We had an event the other day where the exact poll result was the actual data result as well, and it was a really random sort of 63% number as well. So it was like we'd planned it, but it wasn't the case.
Here's hoping. Right.
I'll give it one more second. Okay. You should be able to see the results now.
Okie doke. So fantastic. Have you got an articulated EVP? Let's have a look then. So yes, is that 43%? So not far off. No and unsure, 35-22. Okay. Have you reflected in the last 2 years? Again. Okay. So not too far off then in terms of the data there. So that's kind of what I thought would bear out. And again, that comes from lots of research, conversations, and also what you've told us prior to this event as well. And in terms of that before piece, again, there's a few different interesting nuggets that came out of the survey we conducted around EVP reflecting the people's day-to-day experience. Again, pretty much split evenly. Yes, 54, no, unsure, 46. There are a high percentage, though, of HR leaders who think they do regularly survey their employees on their experience, and they do think their EVP attracts the right level of talent. So there is a bit of a disconnect there. And just before I kind of move on to the after and the most recent piece of data we've got access to, I'll just reiterate some of those takeaways. There is that split between those who say they have this articulated EVP and those who haven't. I'm guessing by the nature of the room and what was brought to the table prior, majority of you perhaps in this room haven't or would like to find out how to take action on that, which is fantastic, and the perfect place is just to start. Again, that split on those who've reflected, updated in the last 2 years. Reflecting and updating I'll come on to, but that's going to be especially important as you move towards, I hate to use the phrase, the new normal, or hiring, crucially retaining the talent you have, and whether that is your EVP and your brand is an accurate reflection of who you are and what you do. But the other key bit here is the majority of businesses are lacking advocacy amongst their people. So whilst they might have this thing called an EVP, the people it's really resonating with is actually, less than 1 in 5 of an organization. And that's troubling. So as I mentioned before, we went through a piece, an exercise last month of capturing HR's reflections on dealing with the effects on the workforce of COVID-19 and how they might perceive their optimism heading in, or how optimistic they're feeling or otherwise in terms of heading into the future. And again, it is a pretty mixed picture. There is uncertainty, overwhelmed, scared, confused. Those words are being bandied about, but there is also hope and optimism. And there's a feeling and a sense that HR and TA are feeling emboldened because of the reaction, the positive reaction in the majority of cases there has been from these teams across the board to managing in the new normal. And I'll come on to that in a second as well. There are concerns. Productivity seems to be a concern, or somewhat concern at the very least, amongst workforces. So the reason you guys are here today, I guess, is nearly 60% consider employer brand as playing a key role in that response to coronavirus. And you can see that through some very high profile cases, your Airbnbs and the Twitters, for example, but also across the board elsewhere. If we do start to move forward, or HR and TA starts to look forward at priorities, there are definite patterns and themes that emerge. So cost reduction as a high priority. Hiring for new roles is less of a priority, but filling those existing vacancies, retaining talent, building candidate databases, pipelining for the future, yes, but mainly retaining that existing talent and growing and developing your own team. And that will become key and will be a key part of your employer brand. How do you better utilize the people you already have in your organization? And just, I think this is the final bit I've got on data, and it's a positive note to end on in these trends is, as I mentioned, HR and TA is feeling emboldened. It is feeling that it's been perceived as more important. 70% think it will be perceived as more important post-COVID-19. And that's great news, and it's great news in terms of brand especially, because it certainly will give that impetus to if you haven't already, finally get your hands around this sort of quite globby subject of creating, developing, measuring an employer brand. And through the great work you're already doing, you know, you can bring that powerful voice and tie it into being that key business objective as well. So just on final one on data, to reiterate a few of those key points. Retention, engagement, cost reduction, they seem to be the top of the priority list alongside developing teams. Productivity is a bit of a concern, perhaps tying in with engagement. But as I said, now is that time to start building, reflecting that employer brand from the inside out with your current employees and get it done. And empower and enable those employees to have a say in shaping that EVP and employer brand as well. And all of this work will give you that competitive edge for tomorrow when hiring levels return, or when growth perhaps is back on the agenda if it isn't already. So the second half of what I'm about to kind of go through, I'm going to light touch on some of these themes, and Paul is going to expand on some of them, and Mark as well to an extent too. But I'm going to talk a bit more about building your EVP and what those components are and how to do it in some light detail. You notice a slight change in theme. This theme is based around kind of our labs. It's very sort of lab field, experimental. It is all about collaboration. So these themes and these exercises, they're real exercises we carry out with teams just like yourselves to get some great outcomes around taking those first steps to building an EVP and an employer brand, or just revisiting what already exists. And often we start with, well, the key question to answer around, well, why do you need an EVP? And this, of course, will be very personal to an organization, depending on who they are and what they do and mindset within that organization and culture. So it's important to define this and be aligned on it from the start. As I said, through a lab, we typically do that with a board team and HR at that table as well, and talent acquisition too. So ask that question. We want an EVP because it will help us to do X. What's that business objective tied in with that as well? This will mean that. What's the outcome you're looking for? Are you, I don't know, going through a period of mass growth? You want to hire but retain a bit of culture, something along those lines. Whatever it might be, as I said, it will be personal to you. And a lot of this stuff you may already be familiar with. If you're not, then I'll just kind of light touch, as I say. What is an employer brand? What makes it up, that whole experience? Well, it's lots of different things. It is your recruitment, yes, your candidate experience, your communication internally, externally, those core values and leadership that sit around that, the behaviors you instill in your organization and how they manifest themselves, the leadership, whether it's top down, collegiate, whatever's within your culture, all of these kind of melting things go into that melting pot that make up that employer brand experience. Perhaps nothing too new there, but it's just good to reiterate. And in terms of defining that kind of EVP piece, one thing we love to do is get people up, walking around the room and sticking their thoughts and post-its, getting it up in this triangle, is defining what is that EVP triangle. What is that core positioning, that statement or set of beliefs at the top that makes our organization who we are? And then what are the underlying themes that might sit underneath that? And this is open to interpretation. Some people say, well, our pillars are our values. Others might say, through the process of going through something like this, well, actually, our pillars aren't our values. They're something completely different. And that's the beauty, I guess, of going through this exercise, is you actually start to open up and ask those questions. You know, if your value is something around integrity, well, and not everyone's on board with that particular statement, or they might feel it's too bland, then they might tease out another phrase or statement. And that becomes part of that EVP, employer brand pillar, that you can start to create content from. I'll give you an example of how this kind of works in practice. With Adidas, shaping the future of sport and having those pillars, believing that through sport they have the power to change lives, diverse and fresh perspectives, careers without borders, pioneering in the future of work and sport needing a space. And these are messages that kind of tease out through their creative, and their careers messaging as well, here to create. They're obviously after a very particular type of person mindset that fits in with that true value of their EVP triangle that they've set out, and the mission that they have, that vision to sort of shape the future of sport, and being diverse, as you can see there in terms of the number of occasions, constantly signposting and referencing this messaging, part of their employer brand. So I'll just touch upon a couple of other bits in terms of areas of focus when building an EVP or an employer brand. One that can be sometimes painful but very illuminating is holding up the mirror. And how you do that is you look at all those different bits of data and touch points, from the employee engagement survey results, Glassdoor, how you respond to Glassdoor as well, competitors. Competitor analysis is always a really interesting one. And there's always a competitive edge, as you might expect in a room, when you get people talking about the competitors and what they like about them, or especially if their competitors have more advanced employer brands. But also things like survey in your candidates, collecting stuff like NPS data and scores as well. If you do that for your candidates through the funnel and at different stages, from VC to onboarding, then that's fantastic. You want that information. Another key element is personas. And again, this is a really interesting one that often gets the boardroom going. And I've seen in our own labs, apologies if you can hear the dog barking at Amazon. I've seen rooms literally light up when we start to talk about personas and what they mean to an organization, because often you start with this blank sheet and you will ask people, well, can you give the person a name? Can you start to flesh out detail? Can you give them an identity? And people can sometimes struggle with that. But as the session kind of moves on and you become more aligned on who it is you're trying to attract, people start to spitball and mention specific examples and behaviors that they really value and like, and actions they like around the business. And you really start to build that picture of the ideal candidate. And personas are there to bring that consistency to your recruitment piece, and bring that kind of alignment around being really focused on the type of people and values and behaviors you wish to attract, and not just in work, outside of work. Where do they hang out? What do they consume? What are their hooks, their drivers, their skills, and how will that fit with our organisation, not just today, but where we want to go tomorrow as well. The candidate experience, again, every candidate experience will be different and will look or be shaped in a slightly different way, but crudely, I've laid it out here. An exercise I love doing is getting people to map out that candidate experience, identifying gaps, seeing if there are any missing pieces or things like that. But ultimately that chain from turning someone from an applicant to an ambassador is a really fascinating piece. All of those touch points at discovery stage, from that time you first engage with them or they engage with you, through to your interview, sealing the deal or breaking it gently, rejecting candidates as being just as important as accepting them. And then the different pieces in between. How do you keep in touch? For example, if a candidate has a notice period or an extended notice period, how do you welcome them? We've been to labs and sometimes there are horror stories out there. I'm obviously not going to name anyone, but there will be pieces where a manager will say, or a TA team, so the home managers that we meet them until the last day of their opening week. And this is still going on. So, those kind of pieces as well, and getting it together. And it's not to lambast anyone, it's just to identify those gaps. And onboarding, never sleeping, how do you continue that? Where does that person hand off to once you've kind of made the initial hire? How does that chain of continual engagement and experience, positive experience, continue as well? I'll just finish off on a few other different bits around that employer brand components and EVP components. Stories and messaging, again, in terms of how to bring your stories alive. Do an exercise, get together, start to flesh out from your persona who this person is, what is their story. Get existing people in your organisation and tell their story as well, especially those who are particularly engaged. Start by asking questions. My name is, I've worked in these roles, I've got these skills, I tend to act like this, I have these goals, and you can find me online in XYZ location, whether it be Facebook, GitHub, or wherever. In terms of just a few different bits of how to do it, the method, in keeping with the labs theme, and obviously in that initial stage, as I mentioned before, you will be looking at all those key ingredients that make up your EVP and employer brand. Those company goals, the working environment you provide, the way you reward people and recognise them, not just financially, performance and development, particularly if you have a history and a heritage, or even if you don't, if you're a relative startup, how do you play on that? All of those key ingredients go into that employer brand experience you see in phase 2, which is everything around your recruitment, yes, but the collateral and content you produce, how you amplify that and what channels you use and how it's communicated, right through to that candidate experience piece and the way you measure it as well. So tips for success, well, the first one we always say to anyone is HR and marketing need to be the best of friends. And if you can, because I know this is often one of the things that comes up in terms of marketing departments not having a closer focus on recruitment marketing. Now is the time to use that position as HRTA leaders, emboldened as you are, to really say, no, we need to come together now. We need to look at what the next steps are and the measures of success and see this as a business priority. Draw up those checklists and identify those gaps. Review the fundamentals. As I said, half of organisations we survey haven't reflected on their EVP, and roughly half of you guys in the last 2 years. Ask yourself and those engaged employees of yours some tough questions. How do we encourage you? X, now that we're remote, or is Z still a strong enough message to inspire people? Test, refine, experiment, be brave. You won't always get it right, and not every initiative will land perhaps as you hope, but just be brave and experimental and start that process, as I said, building from the inside out. Focus on being 1% better every day. That's a phrase that's often used. I think it came from sort of originally British Cycling and Team Sky and how they work and their methods. But the key thing here really is you don't have to go for the grand reveal. You don't have to go for whole-scale change or wait to concoct something that is on such a scale it becomes overwhelming, you can start now to make incremental improvements to that employer brand. And in terms of measurement, decide on those metrics and when you're going to review them. For example, we've got here things like staff turnover, yes, absenteeism rate, average cost per hire, the volume of applicants, time of hire. These are just a few generic KPIs. Perhaps you might want to tailor them to your own organisations, but the key here is to have something like that in place and an understanding of what that data tells you. And again, that's where marketing teams can really help out as well in terms of measuring that digital approach. So I'll just kind of round off, I guess, on this bit. You know, as I said, we knew EVP and EB, employer brand, were already a key focus pre-COVID-19, but there was a lack of consistency in approach to the subject. Well, now is the perfect time to start that journey or revisit what already exists. Keeping hold of those A-star employees is going to be absolutely critical. Strong employer brand, strong engagement, strong retention, especially at this time. But the good news, as I said before, HR, TA, you're emboldened. There is uncertainty, but I do get there's a feeling of optimism as well. And I'd be happy to share the full survey results. Please come see myself, Sam, Leanne, we'd be happy to share that because there's some great respondent feedback about how positive some of those HR, TA leaders are feeling about this being a real time for change and not a full storm. So use this opportunity, don't lose it. And for all of you engaging in this, I wish you the best of luck and happy to give advice as and when. But thank you very much for listening today. It wasn't quite as nerve-wracking as I thought for the first public event, so thank you for that. And I hope you've enjoyed it, and if anyone's got any questions, please feel free to ask away.
Thank you very much, Will. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I had all of a sudden there's someone doing some drilling upstairs, which is always helpful and handy. So hopefully you can hear me. But Will, that was really insightful and really good understanding of what's sort of going on in the market at the moment and what people can do. We haven't had any questions sort of come through at the moment. We might have a few shy people online today. But Will, from my side, and I know you were talking about sort of using some of your employees and you know, getting some questions from them. At the moment where everyone is working from home and working in lockdown, you know, it's a very different scenario to how it was pre-COVID. Is there anything that people can do with their people that are working from home at the moment? Have you seen anyone do anything well, or something that you might think other people should emulate?
Well, I think there's a lot of what you might call some of the light touch kind of virtual engagement pieces. There's online quizzes and employer branding being used as part of that. One thing I found actually, it was really interesting, I can't remember who it was exactly, but as an example of, yes, adapting to the environment we're in, which is still largely a work from home environment. It was one company, and they'd done a series of content around an employee they'd hired virtually, and what that experience was like for them, being hired and onboarded in a virtual environment. And it was a very positive story, as you might expect perhaps, but that's one example. You know, because we're virtual, it doesn't mean stories can't come to life. It doesn't mean, again, I said about the 1%, it doesn't need movie style production values and a big studio to sit your employee down and, you know, do some kind of drone footage overhead, cool shot. It can be very raw and natural, and that's the environment we're in, very raw and natural. So stories like that, if you can bring them to life and those perspectives, is a great place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a couple of questions that have come through. So a lot of businesses have, you know, the overall organisation, but actually the different business units within those might have a slightly different sort of culture or feel or vibe. How would you recommend people have an overall EVP for their company, but be able to reflect those business unit differences?
Yeah, so it is a challenge. I think for us at the initial stage, we try and get as many key stakeholders involved as possible. And this will be a mix. It will be your CEO, but also your FD, get them involved. And not because, you know, this doesn't have to be a huge cost investment. There will be time, but it's about utilizing what you have. It's not all about cost. But FD is a good person. So in any process like this, get as many units as you can, or people representation from the business as you can in that room. Next advice really is to expand it through something like focus groups, and this could be multi-region. You know, there are a lot of businesses out there, especially who are multi-region, who will often have completely different cultures in different countries, perhaps understandably, but they're not unified or tied around one key business theme. They're almost kind of like regional sort of feudal empires in their own right. So, yeah, I mean, it sounds kind of blasé and maybe a bit generic, but I would just stress, please get as many of those key stakeholders, from CEO to HR to finance, marketing as well, because as I said, marketing and HR have to be very close, and start to pivot that direction, not just on product, but also on people.
Yeah, absolutely. Evie, we've got a question come through from you, but I'm hoping that Paula's session is going to answer how to promote the EVP internally. So I might leave your question until the end of Paula's session, if that's okay. But we have also had, and this is a big question, any guidance on average EV anticipated cost if you're building from scratch? Is that a little bit of a how long is a piece of string question?
It is a bit, but thank you, Edward. I appreciate that. That is a factor, and it's often the elephant in the room that kind of gets ignored, I guess, when we talk about these things. It's like, yeah, how much is it going to cost? You know, my only key message in response to that, and I'm happy to discuss this more kind of offline, is it doesn't have to be a huge cost. My key point is, how do you utilize as many people as possible, empower them in your business to create content? And I think Paula will come on to bits and pieces around that as well. How do you leverage the tools you have available in terms of recruitment, CRM or automation, to get those messages across? Your existing marketing functions to have a careers or recruitment focus through digital platforms like social media, etc., etc. It's a really hard one to answer that, but the initial, startup cost for something like this doesn't have to be huge. Most people will have a website, and you will have the ability to customize that to degrees, and you'll be able to, add people's stories from your employees to that, add imagery, add your values, things like that. They don't cost really anything, and there's a resource cost attached, of course, but yeah, tricky one that, but it doesn't have to be costly. That's all I would say is my main point.
Okay, good, excellent. Well, Will, thank you very much for that insightful session. As you said, you have got the full data results that people can get access to if they like. Just visit anyone on the stand today, or? Yeah,
please do. Yes, so the survey we recently conducted ourselves in-house, COVID-19 and the future of HR. We have to share that with people, and you'll get the full insight. There's loads of good stuff there in terms of HR's priorities. And as I mentioned in my speaking segment, there's loads of good stuff about from individual respondents about how they are feeling empowered and see this as real time of change.